Hi, and welcome to another session of The Power of Your Personality. This is our third session. We began with an overview of the 4 personality types. In the previous session, we looked at communicating with the personalities, and today we're going to look at the emotional aspect of the personalities. I'm so thankful you're joining in, whether you are watching as a member of the Bible study that I lead on Wednesday mornings called Women of Worth, or whether you're looking on the Christ Church sites that we have, or my personal page, or on my YouTube channel. I am so thankful that you chose to spend this time with me in looking at our personalities. Let's do a quick review before we get into the emotions of the personalities. I have provided this chart that describes the 4 personalities as quadrants. And so let's look at the 4. First of all, we have the extroverts that are the phlegmatic and the choleric. And then we have introverts, the sanguine and the choleric, and the introverts are the phlegmatic and the melancholy. And then we have the sanguine and the phlegmatic are people-oriented. That means they get their energy from people. And the choleric and the melancholy are task-oriented. They get their energy from doing tasks. And so we can learn from this chart 2 key aspects of the personalities, whether you're extrovert, introvert, task-oriented, or people-oriented. Those 2 give great insight into the character traits of the personalities. So if you don't have this and want this, please message me or make a comment, and I'll be happy to get this chart and all the descriptions to you. Now, we learned about the 4 personalities in the first session, and last week we learned how to communicate. I hope you've had success with communicating with people who might be a little different from you. Now, today I want us to focus on the emotional aspect. To me, this is critical in relationships, to know what emotional triggers are, to know what kind of support each kind of personality needs. So we're going to begin today by looking at the sanguine. And we're going to see for each personality what their basic desire in life is, what their needs are, what their methods of control are, and what their fears are. And when we know these things, it helps us to be in relationship in a much more effective way. So the sanguine, their basic desire in life is having fun. They love to engage with people and have a fun time. And so their needs are going to be related to that. And we're going to look at 4 needs of the sanguine. They have a need for attention, affection, approval, and acceptance. And they're more likely to behave in such a way that demands others to give them what they want. Well, let's look at how that plays out in the life of the sanguine. The first thing we know is they need that attention. See, they have this fear that they're going to be normal and just blend in and become just a part of a backdrop or a part of the wallpaper. And that is not what they need. They need to have attention. They need to be noticed. Many of them dress in a way to be noticed and get attention. It's the way they share their identity and who they are. Often they talk loudly in order to get attention. If they don't get this attention in healthy ways, then sanguines may resort to unhealthy things in order to get attention. You know, classroom teachers see this. They are aware that students, children, teenagers, who can't get attention by being good, then they will get attention by misbehaving. So what can you do if you're in a situation like this? Well, it's important to recognize them, to notice them, comment on them. Go ahead and get it started that way. Comment on what they're wearing. Laugh at their jokes and let them tell you their long version because they need this attention. We always, with all of these emotional needs, have to come to the decision of When am I enabling somebody to live in their weaknesses of the personality? And when am I really helping them? So we have to be aware of that. So keep that in mind. But in order for a sanguine to really thrive, they have to have attention. Give it to them in some way. Give it to them periodically so that when time goes on and you don't have the privilege of really giving them full attention, they will still know that from time to time you do acknowledge and give them the attention that they thrive on. The second need they have is affection. Sally Sanguine wants to be loved. Remember, they want people to like them. They don't want to do anything specific in this affection. They just need to know that you can give them a squeeze of the hand, a hug. Well, in the days of COVID, that's really hard to do. And I feel so for my sanguine friends who are struggling in the isolation and the quarantine because they need people to love on them and to touch them because they're touchy-feely. They need to give hugs. And so this is a really hard time emotionally for them. Know that and help support them through that. They also, related to affection, is they need approval. They don't necessarily want to do anything specific to get you to approve of them, but they just want you to acknowledge that you approve of what they are doing. Now, if they are acting out, showing off, being too loud, and are still seeking approval over and over, then there's a weakness there that needs to be dealt with. And if this is a family member, a loved one, someone you're close to, where you can have the conversation and say, you know, I really do love you and I do like you and you're my best friend, but sometimes your need for approval and affection just is over the top. And so you might be able to speak into that. But sanguines recognize when it is over the top. And then the next thing is for emotional needs is acceptance. They live in a world where, for the most part, people have always tried to fix them. People have always told them, calm down, slow down, get your volume down, lower the enthusiasm, you're living too large. They hear all of those. I know that you're going to comment right now if this is what you've experienced. People always trying to change who you are because it is annoying to them in some way. But what they really need is for you to acknowledge and accept that this is who they are. This is how that God has created them, and they want that acknowledgement and that acceptance. And then what's interesting is if they get that support and they get that love and that encouragement that they crave, they're much more likely to feel comfortable in the relationship with you and not try too hard to get the attention. And so give them attention that they need so that they can feel accepted. Well, this can be a double-edged sword, and you know, we want to be mindful of that because sometimes a sanguine can go into this mode, like me, and I'll do whatever you want. Think about that with young people. If you have teenagers in your life, if you have children in your life and you know that they have this big sanguine personality that's bigger than life and they do anything for people to like them, then one of the concerns would be that they would do anything for people to like them. And you want to really be aware of that and help them to know that they are accepted for who they are, and there's no need to violate any moral principles or their set of values for people to like them. That would be an important lesson to pass on to those in your life who are willing to do anything to get attention. Now we're looking at the method of control for each of the personalities, and for a sanguine, they will control by their charm and their wit. And so the way that looks is they may bat eyes, they may give you a wink, they may snuggle up and cuddle up in order to control what you're doing. They may put on some kind of showy presentation in front of you in order to get you to do the things they want. They would be heard saying things like, "You're just gonna love what we're gonna do," because that's the charm and the wit that they have. So that is a method of control. We're going to look at the fears that each personality has. And so the fear for the sanguine would be all of a sudden not being noticed, becoming unpopular, or becoming ignored, or being sidelined. Many of them are very much consumed with appearance and how they look, how they dress, the presentation they make in front of others. So many are really fearful of getting old or becoming lonely. So as the sanguine ages, he or she would have a concern of being left alone. Can you imagine what those sanguines who are isolated, who are living alone during this quarantine period, can you imagine what they're experiencing? They need encouragement and support. They need phone calls. They need people to arrive at their home and socially distance outside and take them flowers or food or just say hi and let them share a story and laugh with them. They need that, and that is a fear for them. So I would encourage you to think about your sanguine friends who are isolated and really struggling, and give them a phone call of encouragement and tell them how much you love them and appreciate them for who they are and that beautiful, big, wonderful sanguine personality. Another fear that a sanguine has is becoming unattractive. And then this one is running out of money. Because of the four, the sanguine is the quickest to spend money. They spend money on things that will entertain them, that will be fun and engaging, the things that will make them look better, all the skincare, the anti-aging products, anything that would enhance their life, travel, experiencing life. Their fear is running out of money because of the four, they are typically the biggest spenders. So those are things to be mindful of if you are a sanguine, or if you live with a sanguine or have any relationship with a sanguine. Note those things about their emotional needs. Well, let's look next at the choleric. Their basic desire in life is to have control. Have control of a situation or have control of people. So their needs include the following. Their first need is loyalty. They have this hardwired need for people to be loyal in the workplace, in the family, in the team, in the group that they are associated with. They want that group to be loyal to them in terms of support, in terms of control, in terms of giving them credit and recognizing their leadership, in terms of showing them appreciation and acknowledging their achievement. That's an important aspect for the choleric because they spend their life doing. Remember, doing, and they have an emotional need for that to be recognized. Their achievement is important to them. And if you take that achievement recognition away from them, then you're not meeting an emotional need. Remember, those cholerics always have a mental to-do list. We always have something we're thinking about, something that we're planning. Cholerics live very much in the future, looking ahead. And so an emotional need is a recognition of that. They are natural leaders and they will go to the wall for their team. They build a team that is supportive and loyal, and they want that team to be loyal back to the choleric. If they feel betrayed, they will move away from that relationship. Now, depending on the maturity level of the choleric, that means whether or not the choleric is living in his strengths or his weaknesses. He may either attack as a mechanism of defense, or sever a relationship if they suspect that there is disloyalty, or they can learn to extend grace and move on. Now that depends on whether or not they're living in the strengths or the weaknesses. So an immature choleric, one living in weaknesses, will attack and attempt to destroy somebody else. They'll take that person down. But one who is living in strengths and who is much more mature will try to see the other's point of view and will offer grace and some reconnection or resolution of the situation, because they would be a team player in that regard. So if you are a choleric, think about that in your life and how you have responded when people have either overstepped their bounds or who have shown some disloyalty. Was your attempt to take them down, take them out, to discredit them, or to work through the problem, extend grace, mercy, and forgiveness, and move on? Of course, we're all expected to do that in our lives, is to extend grace and mercy and forgiveness and to move forward. But some personalities do this much easier than others. A choleric's focus, remember, is external. They are the extrovert. The focus is on the external, not so much the internal. So they need to see things growing, moving on, moving forward. They need to see progress. Many of you know that I've written some books, and they all have this aspect of looking forward, moving on, and that's my choleric nature, is to always be planning ahead, looking forward, using the past to inform my present while I am moving forward. That's the nature of a choleric. My ministry of coaching and helping to guide people through their life's challenges and hurdles is called Leading Forward, and it's very much in the style of a choleric. So the choleric needs that support of the team. She needs she knows, she is one who knows what needs to be done, and that should be recognized by others. And here is the hard thing for the choleric is she doesn't understand when people don't recognize that. They don't automatically see what needs to be done. Because we are the doers. So if I have a to-do list, and let's say it's a to-do chore list at home or in my personal life or in my work life, I don't get it when other people don't do that and don't recognize that it's clear, it's obvious when a choleric looks around and can see what needs to be done. That word is probably used a lot in the choleric's life. We have things to do. We have a to-do list. Oh, here's what I got done today. And so those are words to pay attention to and acknowledge in the choleric. Well, another thing that is an emotional need is a sense of control. They have to have that sense in their life that they're controlling things. If you have a choleric in your life, find some area where the choleric can have control. That's something interesting to think about, that if you have, especially if you're in a relationship with a choleric, in whatever, whether it's through marriage or in an extended family situation, you have children or a parent or a coworker who is a choleric and perhaps they're living in some weaknesses, give that person something they can control, something they feel as if they have made a decision on, and give them credit for it. That is such a little thing to do. I have done it many times when working with people who are living in some weaknesses, and they are maybe command control central and living in this whole need to control every situation, let them think that they're controlling something, and it will satisfy them. It will feed into this emotional need. The choleric has a need to be right. Oh, it's so hard when a choleric discovers they've messed up with something, or they're not right about something, and it's a humbling experience. But the mature choleric living in a strength would recognize that. You might ask cholerics to share something they know. They have this need to share what they know. They usually have a wellspring of knowledge because they do dig around to find out information so that they can be right. So they study things in order to be right. And so acknowledge that and ask them to share what they know about things. Now, mature cholerics living in the strengths will find worthy opponents to do their verbal sparring with. They will find people who have an equal knowledge of something or an equal passion about something, and then they can have wonderful conversations that are rich in the going back and forth and sharing opinions, even though they might be diverse. But a weak choleric, one living in weaknesses and who is very immature, would look for people with lesser knowledge, lesser strength, and they would spar with them in order to make that person look wrong or look little. And that would be an ineffective method for that choleric to live out life. All right, so a choleric also likes to get credit for good work. They are the worker people in your life. They're always doing. They work harder and faster than other people in your life. They are willing to do it all, but they need that acknowledgement. Now, again, we have to walk that fine line of not enabling people, but being helpful to people and to encourage people. So it's okay to say, wow, I can see all the work you put into preparing this dinner or making this plan or making the vacation happen or whatever it is. Acknowledge that, because if you don't recognize their efforts, they might not do all of that work again. And if it's something you really want them to do, then acknowledge that and don't belittle that or make fun of that. Acknowledge, because you want them to continue to do those things. And here's a question that they love to hear is, I don't know how you do it all. How do you do everything that you do? And so they love to hear that. That's an emotional need for the choleric. Here's another emotional need: to achieve. Achievement. They cannot live without achievement. They are the people in your life who recite their accomplishments. They recite what you did. I know in social media you can spot a choleric by those who are telling you everything they got done that day. They're posting the pictures about everything about their day. And if they're a choleric sanguine, they typically overpost, overshare, because they want the world to recognize their life. Their life is on display. And so the choleric is going to be telling you, I woke up at 6 a.m., I ran 5 miles, and then I came back and I had my power shake for breakfast, and then I did my devotions and read the Bible, and then I went on to work, and here is where I met with X number of people. I took a lunch break. I ran back home so that I could do this and that, and then in the afternoon I picked up the children, and then I came home and prepared the meal, and then after that we sat together as a family and we did this and that, and we played the games and the puzzles, and then I crashed at about 11 p.m. So they want you to know that they were able to cram all of that in a day, because that is their achievement. And so they love to be recognized. And so choleric, be careful not to try to over-impress people by all that you can do, because sometimes it makes other people feel unworthy. And they will come to a point where they will say, oh no, I can't hear another, I can't see another thing that they're putting out there because I can't live up to that, and it's offensive to me, and I just can't deal with it. So again, we want to strike that balance. They also may complain about not having time to waste like other people might. They may insinuate that their to-do list is longer than anybody else's. They may lash out at people who can't get everything done. Remember on the chart that the choleric is opposite from the phlegmatic. And so this is the doer. And they have a bigger to-do list than the phlegmatic. And so they often will lash out at that phlegmatic and say, why don't you ever do anything? Look what all I did today. Why don't you do? And see, that is a weakness. But it's their desire to achieve things, to get things done. If you're having trouble identifying personalities, and this is a way to figure out cholerics. Look at what their schedule is. Look at their workload. Look at their education level and their achievement in certificates, their degrees that they have, and look at just the daily operation in that life. And you can often tell that choleric. Well, they too have a method of control. And especially in a choleric in a weakness, has the threat of anger. I told you not to do that. You know what happens when you do things that I don't want you to do, and here's how it's going to look. And so they would go into that threat of angering. Remember what happened last time, it's going to happen again. And so it's a threat of controlling people in that way. Well, let's look at their fears. Because they are the great achiever, they would have a fear of losing control of a job or a family, because those are areas in which they can control. They would also have a fear of a financial disaster. If you have a choleric in your home that is perhaps the breadwinner or a major contributor financially, and during this period in our country where so many have lost jobs or they have been downsized, then financial disasters take a real hit on the choleric, who has this fear of that exact thing happening. They also have a fear of becoming weak because they see themselves as very strong. And so whether it would be in their mind or whether it would be physically, they have a fear that something is going to happen so that they cannot produce, because that's what they live to do. They would be fearful of becoming incapacitated. So that is the emotional aspect of the choleric. Let's move on to the melancholy. Now remember, their big desire in life is to have perfection, to do things perfectly. Remember, it's to do things the right way. And so right for them means to be the perfect way. So here are their emotional needs. Sensitivity is a real emotional aspect for the melancholy. Not so much for that choleric. But the melancholy has this deep need to be understood and to be supported. We're going to look at that aspect. They need for people to be sensitive to their feelings. See, the feelings are not as an important aspect to that choleric. It's not feelings, it's what are you doing and how are you acting? What is your behavior? But feeling is very important to the melancholy. When you don't know how to respond to that melancholy, then here is a good question for the melancholy. What do you need from me now? Write that one down. That's an important one to ask the melancholy. What do you need from me now? It's really good for any personality, but it's especially good for that melancholy when we don't always know the emotional needs, when we're not tapped into that, especially if you're really a task-oriented person and you're not tapping into the emotional needs of people. Like, you know the needs of a business or an organization, but you might not know the emotional needs of people. Then ask that question, what do you need from me now? And melancholy, be ready to tell it, because that sometimes is a hard question to ask. And so if you just say nothing, well, then you're not letting someone address your emotional needs. When you know that a melancholy is having a hard time, think about her feelings before you respond. Timing is everything. And so when a melancholy opens up, be ready to listen and understand, and don't snap at her or snap at him. And melancholy, really learn to answer when asked what is wrong. And sometimes that's the only question somebody will know to say. What's wrong? And often the melancholy answers, you're going to say it right now. Go ahead, type that in. What do you say when people ask you what is wrong? I know we're going to read the comments, and what we're going to say is, oh, nothing. Or it might be said, nothing. Yes, we know. So be ready to actually share what is wrong. So here are other needs. They need support. So let's use the bridge analogy. All bridges have support underneath. Bridges have support underneath. And without that support, the bridge collapses. Think of the melancholy as that bridge. Without support, he is going to collapse. So a melancholy needs support of people who care, who show they care. They fall apart when people let them down. Now just think about that for a minute and recognize how that looks in a melancholy's life. If a melancholy has been disappointed, has been hurt, has been betrayed, it feels alone, or has gone into some pit of despair, then they begin to fall apart. And a melancholy falls apart by going deep inside. It becomes internal. They become very introverted, and they begin to process the information slowly and repeatedly, over and over. And so it's their nature then, when something's wrong, to go inside and collapse. And so when they don't feel supported, that's what's going to happen. So now that you know that about the melancholies in your life, give support often and early, because they need it. They need that. And then on the other hand, melancholies, recognize that about yourself, that is a tendency, that when you feel as if the bridge is collapsing because support is not there, recognize that as a trigger so that you can work your way out, realize when you're overthinking, go to the person and express the issue or the problem, or talk with a trusted friend, but work it out so you don't go deep within. Melancholies need space. They need space to recharge their batteries and space to heal in order to feel their pain. Now, this can be a space within their home, or it could be in the outside. It could be somewhere far from home. They just need a space where they can re-energize. This space helps them to refresh. It helps them to reorganize. It helps them to relax. And so it's important to help them find the space and to allow them to go to their space. And you know what we know is that we can't stay in the space too long. It's not what God would have us to do when we're sorting through our challenges and our problems in life. It's okay to go into that little cave of isolation for a short time, but God expects us to come out, just as he helped David out when he was in his cave of despair and he fell into the pit. And God said, you know, I can give you a hand out and I can set you up on the miry clay, but you have to come out and you have to take my hand and come out. And so be wary of the melancholy who is slipping down into that spiral down into the pit. They need silence. They need some quiet time. You know, think about, again, the opposite personalities, the sanguine and the melancholy need opposite things when it comes to noise. That melancholy needs some silence and the sanguine needs some noise. That's why they're very, very different. And when you live in the same home with opposite personalities, there needs to be some compromise and some recognition of the difference. Well, each, again, has a method of control. And for the melancholy controls by threats of mood, changing their mood. And they might say things like, this is depressing me. This is making me go inside. This is going to send me into the pit. This is going to change everything. They begin to speak in those exaggerated terms, and they threat about their moods. Well, they also have fears. They have, because they like for things to be perfect, they fear making a mistake and being a failure, and then those sometimes get amplified. And so if they were making a meal and something was off with one of the dishes, then they would see the whole meal as a failure instead of a success. They would be unable to really focus on the good things if they are in a weakness. And so that's a fear that they have. They also fear having to compromise or lower the standards, because in their mind, perfection meets a really high standard. And so if it's not perfect, then they've lowered their standards. So think about a melancholy planning an event and it just doesn't go off. They can't make it perfect, and so they have to lower their standards. Perhaps they can't have all of the people come they wanted to come, or they can't buy all the decorations they had wanted. Then it becomes a substandard event, and so they would want to be cautious of that and careful not to think of everything as substandard if it doesn't achieve perfection. It's realizing when good enough is good enough. It's an important skill for all of us to know. They also have this fear that nobody will understand me. And they often use that line, nobody understands, nobody knows. And it's often because they go into that silent cave and that people don't really know or recognize. And so they have to share it. But that's a fear that melancholy lives with. Well, let's look at our next personality, and that is the phlegmatic. Remember, the basic desire for a phlegmatic is to have peace. Have peace. Remember, they're the ones that want to do things the easy way. They do have needs as well, and one of their needs is to have peace and quiet. Let's just have peace and quiet, people. Because if they're living with sanguine and choleric, they're always doing and laughing and talking. And so they just want things to settle down and slow down and to have peace and quiet. They're hardwired for peaceful, quiet surroundings and having a feeling of self-worth. They like a lifestyle that minimizes stress. So they will back off from stressful encounters. They will back off when decisions have to be made that require taking a stand on something that might be controversial. They maximize the aspect of respect. It's so important to them. Consider that baby you may have had that was really laid back and never fussed, never complained, and then that baby grew up and wanted to live just this kind of laid-back life and didn't need to have a lot of people around, didn't need a large group of friends. But mom is trying to push those friends, and why don't you ever want to be around people? Why don't you ever invite friends over? Why don't you go to somebody's house or go to the dance or go to the party? And so people are trying to change that aspect when they're very content with living just this quiet, easy life. Sometimes parents recognize that in their children and support that and encourage, and others try to change that aspect of that phlegmatic's life. And especially if you live with a choleric, and a choleric's trying to change that of the phlegmatic, get out and do. Come on, you need to be doing, and we need to have people over, and I need to take you places. And so what we want to do is just enjoy quiet time alone with the phlegmatic. That's an emotional need. Well, also an emotional need is this feeling of self-worth. Notice the example I'm going to give is about kids at school. And I think this portrays the four personalities in a way that transfers from school to life in general. A sanguine would come home and say, I am the most popular kid in school. People talk about how fun I am and they want to be around me. The choleric comes home and said, the teacher made me the line leader today. I love being the leader. The melancholy, before she goes to school, has made her bed, and when she comes home, she wants to get right on the homework because that's a task she can do well. The phlegmatic didn't make the bed, didn't clean up the toys, didn't get voted anything at school. She wants to come home and relax and have the parents instill in her a sense of self-worth. She needs to feel that people value her simply because who she is and not who the other people are. So it's an important thing to remember to feed into the self-worth of the phlegmatic. The phlegmatic has another emotional need. It's the lack of stress. He doesn't want to cause trouble, and he doesn't want to draw attention to himself. He's the one, when you go to a restaurant and the steak is not served exactly as it needs to be, will just eat the steak anyway. Other personalities may insist on that being changed. For the choleric, it would say, this is substandard. This is not acceptable. That somebody back there is slacking off. It has to change. Then another aspect of the phlegmatic is respect. The phlegmatic needs more respect than all the other personalities because they're not getting recognition and awards. See, the choleric views respect as coming out of his achievement, the works that he has done. But the phlegmatic needs it for just who he is as the mediator, the even-keeled person, the balanced person. And how then can you show respect to a phlegmatic? Well, I think it's key to know the love language and to speak the love language. If you have a phlegmatic who probably likes the helps, it has the love language of helps and likes to receive acts of service, then you would feed into that and you would support that person through acts of service, perhaps that they give in addition to wanting to receive. Do something you know that is important to her, the phlegmatic. It might mean spending quality time in a very quiet setting. That shows respect, because if you're always asking the phlegmatic to come out and to do and to go and to talk and to be this and to be that and to be perfect, then you're not feeding the emotional needs of the phlegmatic. The next area is how they control. Here is one of the keys for a phlegmatic. They control through procrastination, through not making a decision, because their idea is, if I wait long enough, somebody else will do it. If I just wait long enough, somebody else will decide and I don't have to do it. That is a controlling mechanism. It's also that the way they get other people to do the things that the phlegmatic doesn't want to do. They just ignore it and hope it will go away. Now, that's not a healthy thing. It's not a good thing. These methods of control are not good. They're not healthy. And it's what we do in a weakness, but it is a tendency. That's why it's important to know our personality, so we know our tendency to do things. Well, they have fears also. One of their fears is being pressured to work all the time. That's just the opposite of that choleric, who naturally wants to work all the time. The fear of the phlegmatic is somebody's going to make me do a lot of things I don't want to do. They don't want to be left holding the bag. So they're the ones that have this fear of things falling apart, and they're left to deal with it, because emotionally that is a real struggle. They also have a fear of facing conflict that appears overwhelming to them, because remember, they want to live at peace. They're the peacemaker and the mediator. So they have a fear of being in the face of conflict that they just can't deal with, and often they shut down. Now, I hope that those things I've shared with you about the emotional needs will be helpful to you in your own personality, and most helpful in dealing with others. It might be a lesson that you go back and look at again and focus on the key personalities in your life. Well, let's look at recognizing and fulfilling those emotional needs. I would encourage you to make a list of the emotional needs of a significant person in your life, so that you can see if you are meeting those needs and figure out how to do that. Finding out an appropriate emotional need is one of the most powerful tools you have in a relationship, and you can go a long way in community with others by doing that. And then it's important to recognize your own emotional needs. Make a list of your own emotional needs. Write it down. Think about it. Post it. Because when we understand our core emotions, we can begin to exchange destructive, immature behavior for good, strong, positive ones. So I encourage you to do that. As we wrap up this series, I pose the question, what now? What do you do with the information you have? Well, first of all, assess your strengths. Know what your strengths are. Think about the verse in Psalm chapter 8, verse 5. God created us a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned them with his glory and honor. That's how God created us. And he wants us then to live in the strengths of that beautiful creation that he has made. So look over your personality profile and look realistically at who you are and decide your strengths. I encourage you to find your greatest strengths and look at how you're using those in relationship for others. Thank God for those strengths that he has given you, and accept and receive those. Those who tend to belittle themselves or knock their own behavior and say, I just can't find anything good about myself. You know, that wears on people after a while, because God created all of us with good and for good. That's how he made us. He wants us to live in those strengths. So when we say, I don't really have any good qualities, I can't find any things, it's almost false humility, and it wears on people, because it's not how we're supposed to look at ourselves. We are supposed to look at the good of our personality and find those strengths. So think on this truth. Once again, God created you just a little lower than the angels. Those are pretty high expectations he has for us. So first of all, assess your strengths and then admit your weaknesses. Galatians 6 verse 4 says, each one should judge his own conduct. See, it's for each of us to judge how we are behaving, how we are doing. And then 1 Corinthians 11 verse 28 says, everyone should examine himself. Everyone. That's what our duty is, our responsibility, and not be blindsided by other people recognizing our weaknesses, but us not doing so. Do you have a blind spot? It's important to recognize those because others do. The first step in any kind of improvement in our life is to know our weaknesses, and a refusal to examine our faults keeps us from doing anything positive about them. It's really humbling when we can admit our weak areas and then begin to move forward and to grow up in our personality. It's those immature people who continue to blame others for who they are. At a certain point, can we continue to blame our parents for our behaviors? I know it takes a long time to undo some damage that was done in our childhood, but we're accountable as we mature and grow to get a handle on those things and move forward from those things. A mature person examines herself, finds her faults, and then gets to work on them. Looking at childhood pain and past rejection is really important in discovering why we do the things that we do, but it's not appropriate to place all blame on that, on the past or on others. AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, has people stand and give their names and state who they are by saying, I am an alcoholic. And until a person can recognize that truth, they really cannot go forward in a real healthy and positive way. So I'm asking you to be a part of PA, Personality Anonymous. And I'm asking you to write your own introduction and include an admission of a weakness. So here is how your Personality Anonymous introduction may sound. You might say, I am a charming sanguine, but I am a compulsive talker. If you are a choleric, you might say, I'm a dynamic choleric, but I am bossy and impatient. Then you might say, I'm a really sensitive melancholy, but I can get depressed easily. And you might say this, I am an easygoing phlegmatic, but I am unenthusiastic. And that would be insightful for you to know what your weaknesses are and address those and move forward. Well, the plan for steps for your own personal improvement are found in Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. What do you think about these things? Do you recognize them? Do you think about the strengths and the weaknesses and acknowledge them and have such an awareness that you don't want to live in those weaknesses? Well, we can be transformed as we renew what's going on in our mind, because our mind, what we think about, comes out in what we say, what we feel, and what we do. The rest of that verse is, then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. See, that's how we move forward in God's will, by knowing our weaknesses, thinking about them, assessing them, and then adjusting our life so that we're living in our strengths. That would be God's perfect and pleasing will. The goal of life coaching is to help people to move forward from where they are to where they want to be. And so if you have a weakness, then moving forward that to where you want to be is found in the strengths of your personalities. There is a gap in where you are and where you want to be, and your goal is to live in the positive, life-giving strengths of your personality. Your improvement plan, it means that you follow this idea of going from weaknesses to strengths. So let's look at what each personality might consider for improvement. Sanguines can bite their tongues until they learn to talk half as much. That might be one thing. Cholerics can force themselves to listen to other people's opinions. Melancholies can stop each time they hear themselves being negative. And phlegmatics can feign enthusiasm until it becomes natural. Those are ideas to help you move from weaknesses to strength. Finally, make sure your personal plan for improvement includes the greatest personality of all, the greatest life coach of all, Jesus Christ. Let's look at Psalm 139, verses 23 and 24. I'm going to share a paraphrase of that. Search me, O God, and know my heart. What is way inside the real me? Try me, test me, and know my ways, how I behave and get along with others. If there be any offensive way in me, my actions and moods that offend or hurt other people, please help me to change. Isn't that a beautiful way to look at who we are, how God created us? And it would be a wonderful prayer for us to have. Personality plus power produces positive people. I hope you'll take these, use them, incorporate them in your life, and let me know the power of your own personality.